In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this Sawtooth Star Christmas ornament block in a 12.5 by 12.5. And this one was done in very traditional Christmas colors, but today we are going to do a more sophisticated Christmas palette. And I'm going to show you how changing the colors makes such a difference in the overall look and feel of your block. So first, let's talk about what we need to make this block. So for the red, you're going to need 4 3.5 by 2 3/4 inch pieces and 4 2 3/4 inch squares. For the green in the center, you're going to need 1 3.5 inch square and then 8 2-inch squares. And then you're going to draw a line diagonally on each of these squares. For the holder of the ornament, you're going to need one piece that is 3.5 by 1.5 inches. And then you're going to need white. So you're going to need 4 2-inch squares. And again, draw a line diagonally on that one. Then you're going to need 2 2 3/4 by 1.5 inch. That's going to go on either side of this top. 2 2 3/4 by 9 inch. 1 12.5 by 1.5 and 1 12.5 by 2.5. So all those pieces are going to come together to make this really cute Christmas tree ornament for a quilt block, a table topper, table runner, whatever you want that to be. I used a pencil to mark on the white because it was easy to see. And then I used a Madame So heat erasable pen on the green because I couldn't really see the pencil as well on that. You're going to need rotary cutter, mat, rulers, and then I am going to be using my Cricut Mini press, which is a crafting press, but it's basically a very small iron because we're going to be ironing a lot of small seams, and I like to use a smaller press where I can really see what I'm doing, and it also throws off less heat. So if you have a small iron or are also a crafter and have one of these, start using it for your quilting. I'm going to use a wool mat and a tailor's clapper. So let's get started. The first thing we are going to do is we are going to make this sawtooth star that is going to go in the center. So I'm going to move all of these pieces. We're basically going to work with the red and the green fabrics. Now this green is your center. These are going to be the corners. So we're going to start with these 4 pieces that are 3.5 by 2 3/4, and we're going to make the star points. To do that, we are going to use a stitch and flip method, which basically means we're going to put this corner here. We're going to stitch along the line. Then we're going to take our ruler. We're going to cut off 1/4 inch from that sewing, and we are going to flip this down. So the shape stays the same size, but this corner becomes green instead of just being red like this. Then we're going to repeat the process to do the other side, and we're going to do this 4 times to make the 4 pieces that will become the 8 star points. For the first 4, I have the diagonal line going in the same direction, but if you pivot these and line them up like this, you can daisy chain them easier than trying to go like this where it's going to overlap. So get your corner block where you want it and then pivot it around so that your edges are parallel. Now we have these 4 sewn together. We're just going to snip them apart and back to the workstation to trim and press. When I have quite a few things that I need to trim, I like to just spread them out so I can just move the ruler, trim, 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 fewer steps. And I love this Trim It ruler from Riley Blake. The blue is exactly 1/4 inch. So I can just really quickly line that blue up with the stitch line, move around, and trim all of these edges for the first part of our stitch and flip. You just need to make sure none of them overlap each other so you don't cut something that you're not meaning to cut. But see how fast that got done? When you're quilting and doing piecing, especially when they're, a little smaller, every bit of space makes a difference. So setting the seam basically means don't do anything, just press over those stitches and then take a piece of wood. This is a tailor's clapper. They also make a smaller one, about that long, that is a quilter's clapper. And what it is an unfinished piece of wood. It absorbs the heat and it helps press the space out. So this just flattens those stitches just a little bit more. Then You're going to push that forward and see how it is going to be the same size. Press. And then again, we're going to use the clapper just to get the heat out of the fabric. And you'll see now it's the same size it originally was, but now it has a green corner. So we're going to do that for these other 3 as well. Now we're going to bring the design board back. Basically, we're making a Sawtooth star block, and then we're going to be turning it into a Christmas tree ornament. So the reason I like using design boards when putting blocks together is every once in a while, if you just think you know which parts to sew together, sometimes you're wrong and you'll end up sewing it like that. And then, seam ripper, you can fix it, but it's just easier if you keep it together correctly from the beginning. So I lay it out, make sure it looks good. And then I just take the left side, flip it to the right side, and I put a clip on the sides that get sewn together. So now we can go to the sewing machine and we can sew these 4 parts, then we'll come back, press them, and then we'll add these halves. When I'm sewing blocks together where one is solid and one has seams, I always put the seam side up because I want to make sure that when I'm sewing, these don't get twisted, because then like if this were to sew like that, and then we have this twist, that creates more bulk under the block, which you want to avoid whenever possible. So I always put the ones with the seams on the top. Then you line up that edge. But before you sew, you also want to take a look at these edges, because sometimes your seam block might not be perfectly square. So you want to make sure that these are going straight as well, and that it's not kind of like this. And now I'm going to do this for each of the 4 sets with a scant 1/4 inch seam. And if you're not sure what that means or how to do it, I will put a link and you can watch that video on my YouTube channel. And to make sure that this doesn't pop up and fold back when I'm sewing forward, I usually just use scissors to hold that down until the foot gets over top of it. And when things are working perfectly, the needle is going to go right over that intersecting section on that point. Now I'm also going to be sewing the white and the ornament top together at the same time, just so we can maximize our chain stitching. And to also maximize, I'm just going to leave this last piece in the sewing machine, and I'm going to take these pieces off and go press them and then come back and just keep sewing. All right, we're going to set these seams. And then when you are opening this up, I like to press my seams to one side, and I always put the solid block on top if there's one solid and one with seams. And then I push that one forward and press. And I do it this way for 2 reasons. The first is, if you try and press this the opposite direction, you're turning this whole big thing where it's 3 pieces of fabric, and you're trying to push it back. So it makes a much bigger lump than if you just let this stay the direction that it was. So that's number 1. And I'll show you number 2 once I get this one flipped. So the second reason is so that this star will automatically have nested seams. Now, if you haven't heard of that before, this is what it means. When it sews together and it flips like this, the seams are going to be going in the opposite direction. So if you always press towards the solid, the center row is going to go towards this big part, and the first and third row are going to go to the outside. So then these are not going to be overlapping, right? So when we put it together, we have one going this way, one going this way. That's just another way to reduce the bulk. Okay, now I'm going to get the design board back. We're going to put these sewn pieces on here and do the same thing. We're just going to flip and clip. Now you'll notice I wrote a G on there, and I used the Madame Sew heat erasable pen. And that's how I can remember which piece is which. So all I need to do to get rid of that is add some heat. All right, we're ready to set some more seams, press some more things open, and we are moving right along. So again, because this is the seam that we're opening, we want to put the solid on top. and press that open like that. And while I didn't pin or clip when I was doing smaller things, I definitely do when I start getting into longer rows, just to make sure things aren't shifting as we go. And as you clip this together, getting these seams lined up, you also want to look down here and make sure the seams are lining up here. And that's how you know that you have this together straight. Because my block is slightly off. You'll see it's a little bit longer here, but we're going to just roll with it and fix that in the seam allowances. All right, we got that nicely clipped. So we're going to sew this row together. Okay, so these two rows, we want to have the solid on the top and press forward. You are pressing these two up. Sometimes they don't want to and they want to twist. So make sure you're feeling underneath to make sure that is staying flat as you're pushing that forward. Not sure what happened. This is not going to be a perfect block. This isn't quite lining up. That's a little bit over, but we are just going to make it work. Now we're going to sew the top of the Sawtooth star together. Then we're going to create the corners of the ornament, and then we are going to put the top on. Now you might notice there's some fuzz there because I got ahead of myself and I sewed this row to the top of this Sawtooth star before doing the stitch and flip corners that give it that ornament shape. So that happens to you too. Don't worry, it happens to the best of us. We just get a little bit ahead of ourselves. That is what seam rippers are for. All right, you know the deal. We're just going to set this seam and press it open. And then we're going to talk about what to do when your block isn't as straight and square as you want it to be. So this is supposed to be an 8-inch square, but I got slightly off kilter. So what I often do, and thankfully I did in this case, is when you have border fabrics to make your block the size it needs to be, I always cut these a teeny bit bigger, like 1/4 to a 1/2 inch bigger, so that if something gets crooked like this and it's an area where I could actually just cut it straight, I do. So that's what I'm going to do on this block. We're calling that good. Okay, we're going to stitch and flip in each of these corners and make sure you pay attention to the direction of your drawn line. You want them to be like this so that it's going to create that circle shape of an ornament. Now, just like the stitch and flips that we did to make the star points, we are just going to trim a 1/4 inch from that stitch line, cut those corners off. We will set those seams and press that white back. All right, now we have the ornament shape. So now it is time to put this on. So I'm going to flip that down. You'll notice that the seams are going to be nested. The red's going this direction. This row seams are going in. We're just going to line that up, clip that together, and then we will sew, set the seam, flip, and press. Now, because I did trim the star block a little bit to even it out, I'm going to need to trim the edges up here so that they are matching. So there's our ornament, and now we just need to add the sides and the top and the bottom, and then trim it to be 12.5 inch square. Now, you'll notice on this one, I left it purposely so the bottom was a little bit shorter than the top because I thought that gives us a little bit of chance to maybe embroider like a hook if you wanted to. You can leave these as is. You could add ribbon so it looks like it's hanging. I wanted a little bit more area to play with above the ornament than below. But if you wanted to adjust the pattern and make them even, by all means, go for it. There is our Christmas ornament in a more sophisticated color palette. Here's the same ornament in a more traditional color palette. When I was teaching about color and scrapbooking, we used to call this Christmas at Walmart and Christmas at Nordstrom. Depending on where you're shopping, what you're decorating for, you're going to see different color schemes being used. This would be much more appropriate for a kid's party or a kid's quilt, where this might be the color palette you'd find in like a fancy dinner party or a nice restaurant. And then just to show you how color really impacts everything, because these are all the same exact block, here is that block in pink and lime. Very different, right? Just a very, very different feel. This is often a more vintage Christmas color palette. I've seen people with white flock trees or pink flock trees, and they do everything in this pink and lime. So, what do you like the best? Which appeals to your aesthetic? Would you go with the traditional? Would you go with the pink and lime, more vintage? Or would you go with the more sophisticated that we just did in this video? Let me know in the comments which you prefer. You can find directions for how to make this block on my blog, or if you would like a printer-friendly, ad-free PDF, you can find that in my Etsy shop, and I will have links below the video. Happy sewing and Merry Christmas.